Hey everyone, welcome to Frontline Faith, a weekly podcast where faith and culture meet. I'm your host, Pastor Ryan, a 20-year Army veteran, 2 decades of ministry experience. Thanks for listening. Like, share, subscribe, all the good stuff. You're listening to Frontline Faith. Hey everyone, welcome back to Frontline Faith, where faith and culture meet. You may have noticed something different today. That's right, brand new intro music. I decided to create something original instead of using someone else's copyrighted music. I'd love to hear what you think, so leave a comment and let me know if you're feeling the new vibe. If you're enjoying the show, it helps a ton if you like, share, and subscribe, all the good stuff. And one of the best ways you can support this podcast is by leaving a review. It really helps make a difference in the algorithms so more people can hear this podcast. Let's get into today's episode. Today, we're going to dive into one of the most complex issues in the world today. If you've seen the news, no doubt you have seen video or images of missiles flying overhead from Iran into Israel, even over Syria. You've seen newscasts about USS this, USS that, in the Gulf of this, in the Gulf of that, helping Israel shoot down these rockets, protecting American troops, soldiers, seamen, airmen, all that good stuff. The ongoing battle Israel faces to defend its borders and secure its existence is a huge topic for us today. From its ancient history to its modern-day struggles, Israel has always found itself in the midst of conflict. And today I want to explore both the military and spiritual or religious implication of what's happening. To understand the current battle, we must first look at the broader history of Israel. Many think it was established in 1948. In fact, if you go to Google and you type in Israel and you type in Israel's history, you might see dates like 1948, Israel became a state, and all this good stuff. But I want to go back even further than that. You see, most of what we see going on in today is not a battle from one country to another. It goes deeper than that. It's actually brothers, half-brothers, if you will. You see, the Islamic State, or countries that are majority Islamic, want nothing to do with the Jewish state or the Jewish people of Israel. In fact, most of the chants you hear is for the total annihilation of the Jewish people. You see, the Bible gives us insight to this struggle that's been going on for thousands of years. We're going to talk today about Abraham, his son Isaac, and another son you may not know much about, Ishmael. You see, this conflict, though rooted in distant past, continues to shape the geopolitical and religious landscapes of our world today. From a Christian perspective, this story is about more than just history. It's about the unfolding of God's sovereign plan and how we as believers understand these events in light of Christ. I want you to think about Genesis chapter 12, the call of Abraham and the promise he received from God. Our story begins with God's call to Abraham in Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through 3. You see, when God makes promises to Abraham to make him a greater nation or a great nation, and through him all the families of the earth shall be blessed, this divine promise forms the foundation for everything that follows in the lives of Abraham's descendants. At this point, however, Abraham has no children, and both he and his wife Sarah are very old. I mean, like ancient. The tension between God's promise and their childlessness sets the stage for the events to come. As you move into Genesis chapter 16, Sarah sees no sign of the promise. There's no child to make Abraham into a great nation. She proposes that Abraham do something crazy that no wife in the world today would do or suggest. She says to Abraham, "Take my Egyptian servant Hagar and have a child with her." Now, this practice sounds weird, but it was an acceptable thing to do in the days of Abraham. It reflects a moment of human impatience and the lack of trust in God's timing. In Genesis 16, Hagar conceives, and this leads to tension between her and Sarah. Eventually, Sarah deals harshly with Hagar, and Hagar then flees into the wilderness. Now, in the wilderness, an angel of the Lord appears to Hagar and tells her to return to Sarah. God promises Hagar that her son will become the father of a great nation. Genesis 16:10 through 12. Hagar bears a son named Ishmael. And for 13 years, Abraham believes that Ishmael is the son through whom God's promises will be fulfilled. Remember that great nation promise back in chapter 12? Yet, as we see, God has a different plan. Now, when you move into Genesis chapter 17, 18, and 21, God reaffirms his covenant with Abraham, explicitly stating that the promised son will come through Sarah and not Hagar. In chapter 17, verses 19 through 21, God tells Abraham, "Sarah your wife shall bear you a son, and you shall call his name Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his offspring after him." Now get this. As for Ishmael, God says, "I have heard you. Behold, I have blessed him and will make him fruitful and multiply him greatly. He shall father 12 princes, and I will make him into a great nation. But I will establish my covenant with Isaac." Now, this is huge. This is a critical moment in the biblical narrative, but also helps us understand what's going on today in the Middle East. Though God blesses Ishmael, he makes it clear that his covenant will be fulfilled through Isaac. This distinction lays the groundwork for the historical and spiritual divergence between the descendants of these two sons. In Genesis 21, 1 through 3, Isaac is born, fulfilling God's promise to Sarah. However, this now leads to conflict between Sarah and Hagar once again. In Genesis chapter 21, verses 9 through 10, Sarah sees Ishmael mocking Isaac and demands that Abraham send Hagar and Ishmael away. Though he is distressed, Abraham complies after God reassures him that Ishmael will also be blessed, but that Isaac is the son of promise. Now, as we move into chapter 21 of Genesis, a little bit later down in the chapter, after being sent away, Hagar and Ishmael wander in the wilderness of Beersheba, where they nearly die of thirst. God hears the boys cry. He hears Ishmael, and he opens Hagar's eyes to a well of water, saving them. God renews his promise to make Ishmael a great nation, and Ishmael goes on to live in the wilderness, becoming an expert archer and the father of a large nation, traditionally understood as the Arab peoples today. Now, Isaac, chapter 22 and chapter 25 of Genesis. Isaac grows up as the heir of the covenant promise, the promise that God gave to Abraham initially. In Genesis 22, we see the well-known story of the near sacrifice of Isaac, where Abraham's faith is tested, and God provides a ram in the place of Isaac. Now, this story is key in the Christian understanding of God's covenant faithfulness and points forward to the image of Christ, or the figure of Christ, the ultimate Lamb of God. Now, Isaac eventually marries Rebekah and their son Jacob, who is later named, or his name is changed to Israel. That's chapter 32. He becomes the father of the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, Ishmael is the father of 12 sons, and now Isaac is the father of 12 sons that will become the tribes of Israel. This establishes the direct line of the Jewish people fulfilling the promises made to Abraham. Now, here's where we want to take a break for a second. Islam, or the faith of Islam, traces their line back to Abraham. The Jewish people trace their line back to Abraham. One is a covenant relationship or a covenant promise, and one is a promise of faithfulness by God, not that Isaac would be killed or die off in the desert. Now, from here, the biblical narrative follows the descendants of Isaac, the Jewish people, through the rest of the Old Testament. The 12 tribes of Israel become the nation of Israel, and God continues to fulfill his covenant promises through them, including the giving of the law of Moses, Exodus chapter 20, and the establishment of the Davidic kingdom, or the kingdom of David, the line of David. On the other hand, the Bible tells us little about the descendants of Ishmael. Genesis 25, verse 12 through 8 lists the 12 sons of Ishmael, who would become the leaders of 12 tribes, often associated with the Arab people. Islamic tradition records in the Quran claims that Ishmael is the ancestor of the Arab peoples and that he and Abraham together built the Kaaba in Mecca. Now, I want you to think about this for a second. The specific well that God provides Hagar and Ishmael is not explicitly named or definitively located today. However, some traditions associate it with a well in the area of Mecca in Saudi Arabia, known as the Zamzam well. In Islamic tradition, the well Zamzam is believed to be the one provided by God to Hagar and Ishmael. Now, according to the story, after Hagar and Ishmael were left in the desert, Hagar ran between the hills of Safa and Marwa seeking water until God caused water to miraculously spring up from the ground near Ishmael's feet. The well has been a significant part of the Islamic pilgrimage and is located near Kaaba in Mecca. Now, while the Zamzam well continues to provide water to this day, it is important to note that this is part of the Islamic tradition, and the Bible does not explicitly connect the well in Genesis chapter 21 to any existing well today. Now, I want to go back and look at a couple of things before we jump back into the story. There's a biblical account and there's an Islamic account. The Bible provides no further mention of this well after the incident in Genesis 21, and it does not specify whether the well still exists or where exactly it was located. Now, the Islamic account, the Zamzam well, is considered a miraculous well provided by God and is believed to have a direct link to Hagar and Ishmael. So, while the well exists today, according to Islamic tradition, there is no conclusive evidence from a biblical perspective linking any existing well to the one mentioned in Genesis. From a Christian perspective, the New Testament sheds light on the spiritual significance of Isaac and Ishmael. In Galatians 4:22 through 31, Paul uses the story of Sarah and Hagar as an allegory. He describes Isaac, the child of promise, and as symbolizing the new covenant of grace, while Ishmael, the child born according to the flesh, represents the old covenant of the law. Paul writes in Galatians 4:28, "Now you, brothers, like Isaac, are children of promise." This allegorical reading highlights that the true descendants of Abraham, from a Christian standpoint, are not those born of physical descent, but those who share in the faith of Abraham. Romans chapter 4, look at verse 16 and 17. This points to the inclusion of Gentiles into the family of God through Christ. Look at Romans chapter 11. Breaking down the barriers between Jew and Gentile, Ephesians chapter 2. Now, the historical conflict between Jews and Arabs, particularly between Jews and Muslims, is deeply rooted in these biblical narratives. When Islam arose in the 7th century, it claimed Abraham and Ishmael as part of its spiritual heritage. The spread of Islam across the Middle East and North Africa and beyond brought Muslims into direct contact with Jewish and Christian communities, often leading to conflict, and it goes way back to Isaac and Ishmael. A significant turning point in Jewish Arab relations came with the establishment of the modern day Israel in 1948. Many Arab nations opposed this development, and the conflict over the land, particularly Jerusalem, a city sacred to both Jews and Muslims, has continued today, even in 2024. The political struggle is deeply tied to the religious claims each group makes regarding the promises of Abraham, or God's promises to Abraham. Fast forward to today, Israel faces an evolving military threat. Now, with terrorist groups like Hamas and Hezbollah firing rockets from Gaza, and Hezbollah stockpiling weapons in Lebanon, Israel's defense forces are continually on high alert. Even the citizens have to practice incoming bomb drills for their safety. It's just a normal day part of life. Despite peace agreements with countries like Egypt and Jordan, the existential threat remains from groups who deny Israel's right to exist. And it goes back to Abraham. As you watch the news, you'll hear references to the Iron Dome, the missile defense system. It's widely regarded as one of the most advanced in the world, has been crucial in protecting Israeli citizens. Here's a fact that I found. Since its implementation, the Iron Dome has intercepted thousands of rockets with an estimated 90% success rate, saving countless lives. The cutting-edge technology, combined with Israel's military intelligence, which we've already seen displayed their full force on the news, it plays a vital role in maintaining security. However, military might alone is not enough. Israel's battles are also fought on the psychological and propaganda fronts, with groups like Hamas leveraging social media to wage an information war. The international community often condemns Israel for defending itself, with accusations of disproportionate use of force. But here's an important point. Israel uses missiles to protect its civilians, while Hamas uses civilians to protect its missiles. Benjamin Netanyahu. This perfectly sums up the asymmetrical nature of this conflict. But there are religious implications. Israel's battle is not only a military one, it is profoundly religious. Jerusalem, in particular, holds immense significance for Jews and Christians, and the Muslim faith also believe their roots trace back to Jerusalem. For Jews, it is the site of the ancient temples, the center of worship, and the capital of the Promised Land. For Christians, it is where Jesus walked, was crucified, and resurrected. In order to understand the Muslim side, you have to go back to their claim that Abraham and Ishmael built up this area. However, the promise was to Isaac, not Ishmael. And so the Israeli people, the Jewish people, can trace their line all the way back to Abraham. This is where the conflict is. This is where the struggle is. The Muslims, however, claim Jerusalem as a place for their holy sites. The Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock, both located on the Temple Mount. It's on top of the place where the Jewish people believe the temple is to be. This site is considered the third holiest place in Islam after Mecca and Medina. Now, why is the Temple Mount significant to Muslims? The Al-Aqsa Mosque is the third holiest site. The mosque itself is a part of a larger complex known as the Haram al-Sharif. According to Islamic tradition, the Prophet Muhammad is believed to have been transported from Mecca to this site, where he ascended to heaven to meet with earlier prophets and received instructions from God. This is significant to understand why Islam or Muslims believe Jerusalem to be their holy site, or to have holy sites in Jerusalem. You see, the Muslim view Jerusalem as a sacred because of the religious significance of Muhammad and his night's journey. Now, we haven't talked about the Quran or much about the Muslim faith. After Muhammad died, his followers wrote the Quran from oral tradition. It wasn't the same as holy and inspired by God himself through the prophets, through the apostles, through Christ. Like the Quran and the Bible are not on the same page. They're not equal opposites of one another. But I want to talk about something, the struggle that we have right now as believers who live in the United States. We don't understand a lot of the religious implications of Jerusalem, nor do we think about the history of Ishmael and Isaac on a daily basis. But for the Jewish people defending themselves, defending their land that God had promised them through Abraham, it's a much bigger ordeal. The religious significance of the land, Jerusalem itself, fuels much of this tension. Hamas and other radical Islamist factions who trace their line to the Arabs all the way back to Ishmael see the existence of Israel as an affront to Islamic claims over the land. Their goal is not merely political, but theological. They believe they are engaged in a holy war, a jihad, to reclaim what they see as Islamic territory. This is why peace negotiations often fail, because the conflict is not merely about land, it's about deeply held religious convictions. The Islamic faith wants nothing to do with the Jewish faith. In fact, they want to wipe them out altogether. Here's a quote from Amos chapter 9, verse 14. God says through the prophet, "I will bring back my people Israel from exile. They will rebuild the ruined cities and live in them." This passage has been a cornerstone for the Jewish people, the movement for the return of the Jewish people to their homeland. To Israelis, their claim to the land is not just historical, but divinely ordained by God Himself, giving them a unique and profound connection to it. One of the questions often asked is, why is peace so elusive in the Middle East? From the different accords in the 1990s to the recent brokered agreements, peace initiatives have come and gone, but the violence still remains. The reason is twofold. First, there's the refusal by many in the Arab world to accept Israel's right to exist in Israel. And second, there is this internal division with the Palestinian territories between groups like Hamas and the Palestinian Authority, who hold different visions for the future. Israel has made significant concessions for peace in the past, such as withdrawing from the Gaza Strip in 2005, but those gestures were met with increased rocket fire and attacks. For Israel, peace requires security guarantees that are often impossible to achieve in a region where its enemies are committed to its destruction. In 2021 alone, over 4,300 rockets were fired at Israel from Gaza during an 11-day conflict. While the Iron Dome intercepted most of them, civilians were still injured, and the psychological toll of living under constant threat cannot be overstated. We've seen a couple years ago, October the 6th is the big date. It's Israel's 9/11. Things are still going on. Iran still shooting missiles over. Today, Israel has said it's going to retaliate. But what's the role of faith in Israel's future? As Christians, it's important to recognize the role that Israel plays in biblical prophecy and in the history of our faith. Israel's existence is more than just a geopolitical fact. It is a fulfillment of promises made thousands of years ago. The Bible speaks of the return of the Jewish people to their homeland and the restoration of Israel. "And I will give you a new heart, and a new spirit I will put within you. And I will remove the heart of stone from your flesh and give you a heart of flesh." Ezekiel 36:26. Many believe this prophecy refers to a future time of spiritual renewal, not only for Israel, but for the whole world, signaling the eventual return of Christ. Israel's future is intricately tied to the unfolding of biblical history. As we support Israel's right to defend itself, we must also pray for the peace of Jerusalem, as commanded in Psalm 122. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. May those who love you be secure. This means supporting Israel while also longing for the day when true peace will be established, not just political peace, but the peace of God's kingdom. Israel's ongoing battle is about survival, military, politically, and spiritually. It's a fight for the right to exist in a hostile region, but it's also a struggle that has deep religious implications. As we watch the events unfold, we should remember that Israel's existence is not a random occurrence. It's part of a larger story, a divine narrative that points toward the ultimate redemption of God's people. And it started back in Genesis chapter 12 between God and Abraham. As Christians, we recognize that the ancient struggle between the descendants of Isaac and Ishmael is not merely political or ethnic, but deeply spiritual. In Christ, however, there is hope for reconciliation. Ephesians 2:14 tells us that Jesus himself is our peace, who has made us both one and has broken down his flesh, the dividing wall of hostility. Christ came to reconcile all people to God, whether Jew, Arab, or Gentile, offering peace and salvation through his sacrifice. The ultimate resolution in this conflict, therefore, it doesn't lie in political agreements or military victories, but in the transformative power of the gospel. As followers of Christ, we are called to be peacemakers, seeking to bring the message of reconciliation to a world still divided by the legacy of Isaac and Ishmael. Let us place our hope and peace in the Prince of Peace, who alone can bring true and lasting peace to this ancient struggle. I want to encourage you to remain informed, support Israel in prayer, and to understand the battle Israel faces. Thank you for joining me today on Frontline Faith. I hope this episode has given you a deeper understanding of Israel's ongoing battle and the important role faith plays in this conflict. Stay tuned for more discussions on faith and culture. Until next time, live Coram Deo.